Hello and welcome to a special edition of World Insight with me, Tian Wei, on the DPRK after Singapore Summit. Coming up on today's program, the DPRK could get down to work on growing the economy after rapprochement with the U.S. at the Singapore Summit. I talked to the founder of Choson Exchange, a group focused on DPRK's entrepreneurs, about the nation's improving business climate. The delivery of humanitarian aid will likely improve along with the easing of tensions in the Korean Peninsula. I talked to a top Red Cross official in Northeast Asia on the importance of aid and why it should be beyond politics. And let's walk down memory lane at last of our program with longtime observer of Northeast Asia diplomacy, who talks about the history of interaction, the push and pull of relations between the DPRK and the United States. Let's begin our program today with prospects for the DPRK economy. As DPRK leader Kim Jong-un and the U.S. President Donald Trump concluded their historic summit this week, all eyes are now on the potential economic opening up of the country. The DPRK has already set the goal of prioritizing socialist economic growth in April. On that, earlier this week, I caught up with Geoffrey See, the founder and chairman of Choson Exchange. His group aims to support business-minded individuals in the DPRK through workshops and internships inside and outside the country. Mr. See has become popular recently after his TED Talk introducing this side of the DPRK to the rest of the world. Let's listen in to our conversation about local entrepreneurship and the little-known market economy growing in the DPRK. Welcome, Geoffrey, to our program.
Thanks.
I just want to take a look at your passport. Just how many chops you have got from DPRK, because you frequent there 40 times at least.
Yeah, so I have 40 trips to North Korea. Each trip is about 5 shops, so I have probably like 200 stamps and a lot of visas from North Korea and as well as from China, because we have to go through Beijing every time we go to North Korea.
Okay, what is the best flight from Beijing to North Korea?
I always take the Air Korea flight.
Yeah.
It's all Russian planes, noontime. Food there is not the best, but the service is great.
But that is a unique experience, isn't it, for many? But for you, it's part of the job. Yeah. Because you originally started this NGO trying to create some type between Singapore and the DPRK. Make sure DPRK can develop its economy. Tell me about what exactly you do.
Yeah, so we bring volunteers to North Korea to run workshops in economic policy, business and entrepreneurship. And we also bring the North Koreans overseas to places like Vietnam, China, Singapore to learn about how other countries develop their economy.
Okay, so what is the latest trip you have made?
Yeah, so we just went in there in May, so that was last month, to run a workshop on startups and entrepreneurship. And we have another trip coming up in August to look at the real estate market in North Korea and to do some training around that.
Sounds fascinating, but some people might have the question, well, wait a minute. They do not have yet a market economy. It's all central planned. Yeah. And you heard about the so-called Bianjin policy. Yeah. On the one hand, develop and complete the nuclear program. On the other hand, develop economy, but it's the state economy. So why entrepreneurship? Who would receive that kind of training?
Yeah, so I think that's a misperception of North Korea.
I see.
I think North Korea, compared to 20 years ago, is a very different place. There's been a lot of policy innovation and experimentation in the last
Tell us more about that, exactly what is happening in DPRK.
Yeah. So I think the last decade of work that we've been doing there, we have seen things like some form of agricultural reform, where they're giving more of the produce to the farmers and allowing them to own it and trade it. We're also seeing economic zones being developed in North Korea. So they designated a lot of economic zones.
Do you mean the Kaesong development zone that they're having with the South Koreans, or there are also many others?
So that's one zone, but there's like 20 over zones that they have declared in like the last 5 years.
Do they have different functions?
So they are trying to target different industries. Some are a bit more successful. Most of them are still waiting for investors to come in. But I think what's important is that those zones give them a platform to experiment with new policies and new laws that they need to develop the country. And then we're also seeing a lot more autonomy to enterprises.
Really?
Yeah. So
in what way?
So North Koreans, I think they have more room to get a license to set up a business, make decisions on who to hire, and also to kind of benefit if the business is doing well and having a share of the profit. So they still don't have private enterprises, but then there are strong incentives for people to build a successful business and to grow.
Yeah. You know, for those who are watching our program, many of them are coming from developed economies, so they do not necessarily have a lot of information about the DPRK. So they might say, Jeffrey, what you just said, probably it's a propaganda war for North Korea. They could also say, wow, probably who you are dealing with are the most privileged among those in DPRK. What would you say?
Yeah, I think I agree with you that the people that we train are more skewed towards the upper and upper middle class of North Korea. But we do look a lot at the education background. So when we run this Women in Business program, I would say 40 to 60% of them have a university degree. And so we know that if you have a university degree, you're quite elite in North Korea. But we also have 40 to 60% of them who don't have a university degree. So at least we know that we are reaching quite a wide span of audience. And we want to make sure that it's accessible to as many people as we can.
Tell me about exactly how the DPRK people there are seeing entrepreneurship, are seeing the outside world. You took them to China, to Vietnam, to many other countries. Tell me how they respond.
Yeah. So, like on my first trip to North Korea in 2007, so this was more than a decade ago, I remember that I had a tour guide. She was a university student, an intern, and she was bringing me around the country. And what was surprising to me, this being my first trip, was that she said she wanted to be a business leader to show that women can be great business leaders. And I was also kind of, you mean there's business in North Korea and you're interested in it? And what I realized after that is that a lot of people are very interested in this, is because they are starting to see a lot of people who have become successful in terms of pursuing their aspiration, having more autonomy, and also becoming wealthy through building small-scale businesses. And for North Koreans who are working in the government and their pay is not very high, you know, very often they're looking to family members who are successful business people now to support them.
Give me one or two examples. What kind of small business are they running?
Yeah. So one of the participants that we had in our program, you know, he's been to like 6 or 7 workshops that we did in North Korea. And at one point he decided that I want to have a different concept for convenience stores in North Korea.
Really?
And the problem with convenience stores is that they used to open from 9 to 5 because it's very much following the state-run model. And he said, you know, I want people to buy goods when they're going to work and buy goods when they're coming back from work. And his innovation was that I'm going to set up a chain of convenience stores that would just open at these different hours.
But is it possible?
And he did it. He now has 15 stores, I think, in Pyongyang. And that's obviously one of the more successful businesses that we've seen come out. But for me, it was just a very simple innovation, but very relevant because it's about North Koreans thinking about what's innovative in their own context.
You started almost in 2007, going for the very first time to North Korea, to now it's more than 10 years. How fast is this development of entrepreneurship and the realization that the country is changing?
You would think it's a different country.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, people are seeing, you know, you went there when the roads were empty, there were few restaurants, and then now you go in there and in some parts you have mild traffic jams, and that is a huge difference. When I went in there, people didn't have cell phones. Yes. Now everyone is on a cell phone.
Are they?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that cell phone connected to the rest of the world or only inside the country?
Unfortunately, it's only for inside the country.
I see. But already hardware catching up.
Hardware and mindsets, because people are coming to China, they're seeing people use WeChat, their partners are using WeChat, and they're coming back and saying, I want to develop an app for the domestic network. And people have come through our workshop with ideas that look like that.
At this critical juncture of Kim-Trump summit, or the DPRK US summit, how do you think the pace of economic development will interact with the international community's interaction with DPRK?
So I think one thing we really hope for after the summit is that the North Koreans will be a lot more confident about their situation with their neighboring countries, with South Korea, with China, with the United States, and they feel that they're able to do more experimentation, do it more quickly because they feel that they are safer and it's a less unstable situation. And I think that is great for business people and entrepreneurs on the ground because they hopefully would have more freedom to experiment and come up with new innovative business ideas.
To the North Koreans, if I could generalize like that, of course it's very hard to general because the country, they have different perspectives among the people. To them, what is this nuclear issue? And how do they see outside sanctions, attitudes, the current negotiations going on?
For the business people, the entrepreneurs that we train, I think the nuclear issue is not something that's on their mind day to day because they are kind of struggling to do things at it. But I think where it prevents North Korea from fulfilling its potential is that a lot of these people who are building small businesses now could be building much larger, much more successful businesses if the sanctions are not there. And that is what they're not seeing because they never had that experience, right? For the last 20 years, they've lived under this sanctions regime. And they've tried their best to be entrepreneurial, innovative in that context. But I think our hope is that if the sanction regime changes or is lifted, these North Koreans would be able to think bigger and try bigger things.
Are you trying to persuade everybody to lift the sanctions? It sounds like you are, but there are reasons why the sanctions are there. Adopted by the UN, those at least.
So I think definitely there are multiple issues here, right? What we care about is the economic development in North Korea, our entrepreneurship, and North Koreans having a better standard of living. This is, in a way, tangential to the nuclear issue. We would like the nuclear issue to be solved because we want Northeast Asia to be a safer place. But at the same time, we want to make sure that it's something that, we are trying to achieve that goal while keeping in mind that there are 25 million people there who need to make a living for themselves. And how do we ensure that we are able to achieve that goal of denuclearization or safety for the region while ensuring that these people have opportunities for themselves.
You had a story about bringing North Koreans to Vietnam and going to the stock exchange. Tell me more about that on air.
So we bring the North Koreans out to Vietnam, Singapore for training, and 2 years ago we brought them to Vietnam, and they always love to visit stock exchanges.
Really? Did you ask them why?
So I think for them, they see it as something that's very alien, but at the same time very representative of a different kind of economy.
Yes, and flashy too.
Yeah, it's flashy. It sounds interesting.
Yes.
They don't realize there's most people sitting in front of computers. But we went in there, and there was this lady who founded the stock exchange, and she came down to talk to them. And the North Koreans obviously couldn't understand most of the ideas that were being discussed because they don't have experience with stocks.
No. All of those concepts are alien.
Yeah, exactly. And so when they were leaving, the lady just grabbed our delegation head and she told her, "Oh, don't worry about this. 16 years ago, they told me to set up a stock exchange. And I'm in Vietnam. I have no experience. I didn't know anything about it. And now I run a stock exchange."
Wow.
So her message is that you will learn this. And if it's useful to you, maybe in 5, 10 years' time, some of the North Koreans we train hopefully will be building a stock exchange in North Korea.
Well, groping the stone where you cross the river, right? As said by Mr. Deng Xiaoping from China. That's exactly what's going to happen. But having said that, though, are you too optimistic?
I think, having done work in this field for 10 over years.
Most of your youth,
I know.
if you look at it,
you kind of have this mix of pessimism and optimism.
Tell me more about that.
I think the pessimism part is that you feel like you've seen this over and over again, right? You hope the country opens up and the rest of the world open up to North Korea too. And for more than a decade, it's not happened. But then I think when you see that there is that opportunity, I think you have to have faith. You have to believe that something can happen. Otherwise, the work you do is pointless, right? And I think for us is that we have to work with the assumption that someday things will improve. And the work we do, the training we do is going to matter for these North Koreans who are learning things that they can implement in that future, rather than saying that, things will never change and giving up on it.
Where did you get your money?
So we get our funding from workshop leaders, volunteers who go with us to North Korea. They contribute part of the cost, and we get some institutional foundations who donate to our program.
Under sanction, there's a problem?
So for us, we make sure whatever we do is in compliance with sanctions. So that's not been an issue, but where we have been affected is that donors get scared because of the tensions, and they have pulled back a lot because of that.
Will the summit help eventually?
I hope so. I think we will see. I think it's still early. And generally, I think a lot of donors tend to lag behind events.
Yeah.
I think they will probably want to wait out for a year or two to see how things unfold.
I see. Jeffrey, you told me before we come onto the stage that you interacted with your tour guide at that time, was a very young girl in North Korea, your first trip there.
Yeah.
I wondered, are you still keeping in touch with her?
Unfortunately, no. It's not a place where it was easy to keep in touch at that point in time with people that we just meet through the trip. But then, since then, we have worked with 2,000 of the North Koreans, and I don't see it as like I'm helping that one individual, but more important, it was the message from her was like, bring this knowledge in, all of us need it.
I hope CGTN will have better access to DPRK so that many people, including the interpreter and tour guide for you for their very first trip to DPRK, will hear your voice.
Well, I hope the next time I'll see you in Pyongyang and we'll be chatting in Pyongyang.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Jeffrey C.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it. Great work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Young man Jeffrey C. doing a great job in DPRK, encouraging the entrepreneurship in that country. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. The easing of tension in the Korean Peninsula will likely improve the delivery of vital humanitarian aid to DPRK. I talked to a top official coming from ICRC in Northeast Asia. Why humanitarian aid should be young politics. And later in the program, I walk down memory lane with a longtime observer of Northeast Asia diplomacy who talks about the rise and fall of relations between the DPRK and the U.S. through decades. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Along with denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, humanitarian aid to DPRK is a big concern. Aid could better flow into the DPRK as it opened up to the international community since the thaw in relations with South Korea and the U.S. Pyongyang has faced many humanitarian challenges in the face of continued sanctions. To ease the situation, many humanitarian institutions, like the International Committee of the Red Cross, has helped the DPRK with technical and material support. I recently caught up with Pierre Norbs, who is the head of the ICRC regional delegation for East Asia. He frequented DPRK throughout the years he's working here in this region. He talked about his personal experience when he's there and when he worked for the cause of ICRC in DPRK. Pierre, welcome to CGTN. Tell me exactly, from the ICRC's perspective, what exactly is the humanitarian situation on the ground in DPRK?
Well, the full extent of the humanitarian situation, we don't know it, but what we observe from programs we develop in hospitals or programs we develop in physical rehabilitation centers is that some basic equipment are lacking, that hospitals don't have much medicine, they are lacking also consumables. So overall, there are plenty of needs that should be covered by humanitarian assistance.
You visited some of these areas. Where are your projects?
Well, I visited last year our physical rehabilitation center in Songrim, and I was amazed by the state of the building. It was completely dilapidated. We are now renovating it. We are putting it back into function, and it starts producing effects.
How much access you have to the DPRK society and to the real people there?
Well, when we implement a program, it means we have access to the people. So when we work in hospitals, we want to have access to patients. When we work to do physical rehabilitation, we have access to people as well. If we don't have a proper access, we prefer not to engage into a program.
What does access mean to you?
Access means being able to talk to the people directly, to the people we want to assist. It means also to be able to engage with the authorities who have the overview of the kind of program we develop.
I know during your field trips to DPRK, you've been interacting with the DPRK side, even with the foreign ministry. Tell me what exactly is the style of conversation, and also what are some of the issues, if you can,
Well, the conversation, I would say, it's like in any other country. We discuss programs, we discuss the modalities to implement them. If we want to develop something in an hospital, we need to discuss with the Ministry of Health. If we want to implement a training for surgeons, we need to make sure that the training is in line with the protocols that the Ministry of Health is developing. So this is the kind of discussion we have with the authorities. This is also what we are developing with the DPRK Red Cross, which is closely working with us. It's true our programs in DPRK are for the moment relatively modest, but I'm really convinced we have an important impact. Like, for example, last year we treated something like 2,000 people that were disabled. We provided water supply for 15,000 civilians living in Kaesong. And this is tangible. We see directly the benefit and the impact on the people.
How different size governments, international organizations are working with you? After all, there are still the UN sanctions. There's also the unilateral sanctions.
Well, there are different levels of coordination. First, to operate in DPRK, as you said, we have to handle the sanction regime. So most of the assistance we provide to DPRK is transiting through China. So we have a dialogue with the Chinese authorities, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also with the customs administration, so that the assistance we bring is validated, approved, and can go into DPRK legally in accordance with the sanction regime. Then we have coordination in the country itself. We have coordination with the authorities, but we have also coordination with other humanitarian actors.
When you work with China, what are some of the issues you're working with China mostly? And what are some of the projects that you plan to work on with China for the near future?
With China, regarding DPRK itself, we are purchasing quite a lot of equipment for DPRK in China.
What kinds of equipment?
Like, for example, we have water programs in Kaesong. We need to purchase pumps, we need to purchase pipes, we need to purchase all sorts of civil engineering equipment, dual-use equipment. So on this we work with the Ministry of Commerce to identify suppliers. We work with the Customs Department to ensure they can cross into DPRK, and we work with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs also to enable our team to access DPRK through China.
As you may know, a peace treaty could be very difficult to reach. It involves so many different players, not just countries, but also international organizations and recount of history, many other issues. During this process, Pierre, what can be done for the reunion of the families?
Well, there are plenty of possibilities for the families. First, what concretely they expect is to meet each other. My understanding from the Panmunjom Declaration is that on the 15th of August there should be such a meeting. It's great, it's wonderful, it's a first step. It will probably impact 100 of people, but it's not sufficient. What we need to put in place is a more sustainable system so that families, separated families from the south and the north can get in touch. Yeah. It's possible through messages, through a video call, or through regular family meetings. So this is something we have proposed our support to north and south. We have offered this service, and we will see that there will be this inter-Korean Red Cross talks on the 22nd of June. So we hope that our offer will be taken and that we can be useful in that process.
But your offer probably would be scrutinized by both sides. I mean, for the DPRK side, whether there is the approach that they want to have their citizens directly interact with the outside world, for example, through video phone or other ways that you offer. And from the other side, let's just say some in the United States, they could be asking you the question, are you trying to do the propaganda war for DPRK? So you will be scrutinized by both sides. Are you ready for that?
Well, absolutely. We are ready to be scrutinized and to be under tight observation. The objective of putting families together is to exchange family news. So if the authorities want to listen to the conversation, fair enough, they can. When we exchange messages between separated families, the messages are open. They can be read, they can be censored. So we have absolutely no problem with a form of control, as long as the families can talk to each other. And this is for us the most important.
Besides family reunions, you're also talking about the demining as well as looking for the missing person as a result of previous wars. What would be the first step to approach that subject?
Yes, it's true. One of the important remain from the conflict is first on the demarcation line, on the demilitarized zone, there are still plenty of mines. Right. And well, since the end of the hostilities, we count more than 16,000 victims of mines and unexploded ammunition in DPRK. So we have developed with them a program to decontaminating unexploded ordnance. Once this is done, but this can take a long time, then the issue is to recover the buried mortal remain on the battlefield. This is a very huge work. We've done that in many other countries. I was, in my previous assignment, working on that specific file between Iran and Iraq. We're talking about 10,000s of mortal remains. It takes a lot of time, but it's always very important for the families, for the memory, and this is something also we are ready to provide support to DPRK and the Republic of Korea. We have an expertise, we have a know-how, and I think in the frame of a peace treaty, there should be a mechanism to tackle this issue of both the separated family and the missing.
If the peace treaty is still too far away from us, some of the things we could work on, possibly, is about interactions and also sanctions. As you may know, there's UN sanctions against the DPRK. There's also unilateral sanctions, such as that from the United States against the DPRK regarding other countries as well. So what do you think can be the very first step if the other side interact well for a common purpose with the international community?
So for us, the most important, if the discussions, if the political discussions are going in the right direction, would be to have a signal from the international community that funding for humanitarian assistance in DPRK is unlocked. At the moment, it's extremely difficult to get funds to operate in DPRK. We are largely underfunded ourselves, and it limits our capacity to operate. The situation in DPRK also is not necessarily very conducive to carry out humanitarian programs.
What do you mean?
Well, lots of control, lots of constraints, and we hope that through the political discussion, the conditions, the working condition in DPRK could ease a little bit. So if we have that in DPRK and a little bit more funding for us, but for, I would say, most of the humanitarian actors, we could already mitigate the impact of sanction relatively quickly.
Fundings and humanitarian commitment have been made by countries and players to the ICRC to operate in DPRK, and yet those commitments are not being fulfilled. Are you expecting situation to change? What really is the role of those political negotiations?
Well, unfortunately, pledges of funding at the moment for DPRK are quite limited. Most of our operations in DPRK are absolutely not funded, so we do it from our own reserve. This is why our programs are modest. It's also a number of constraints in the north that prevent us from doing more. So I would say for the moment we are in a kind of vicious circle. Funding is not coming. It's not coming because working conditions in DPRK are also not ideal. So we hope with the political negotiation we can enter into a more virtuous circle where funding is coming and we have more opening in the field.
If you could provide any suggestion to the political leaders, given the fact that they could be listening, What would you say?
If I could provide one advice is don't politicize humanitarian assistance and depoliticize humanitarian assistance. We need to be able to operate. When I say we, it's we, the humanitarian actors. We cannot have a black hole of humanitarian assistance. So, in my opinion, whatever the result of the political dialogue is, there should be humanitarian funding open to the population in DPRK.
Pierre, thank you so much to you and your colleagues who are working in DPRK to cope with unpredictable situations all the time. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be the voice of these people. Thank you.
You're watching World Insight. Our program is coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. U.S. President Donald Trump has arrived in Washington after his summit with DPRK leader Kim Jong-un. He said Pyongyang no longer posed a nuclear threat and the DPRK was no longer America's biggest problem. But any deal reached at the crucial summit in Singapore will have to pass the test of time. So I asked a long-time diplomatic observer from the United States to recall the history of interactions between the DPRK and the U.S. Let's listen in. And I'm joined by Johnson Pollock, a non-resident senior fellow in the John Thornton China Center and Center for East Asia Policy Studies of the Brookings Institution. He's also one of those instrumental persons contributing ideas to the issue of Korean Peninsula nuclear issue. Mr. Palach, welcome to our program. If I could begin by asking you, Mr. Palach, the fact that the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue has been on the top of the agenda line of presidents of the United States. Clinton, George W. You also have Obama and now Trump. So how usually these presidents, who are not experts of international relations, learn about the issue?
Well, of course, this issue specifically has evolved a great deal over time. The issues with which President Clinton grappled with are very different from the ones now that President Trump is presumably grappling with. I think in the case of most presidents, what they learn about this issue comes in early intelligence briefings that they might receive upon becoming president. And hopefully that provides a basis on which policy can then be deliberated and decided. The other issue, of course, though, is whether or not there's any kind of an ongoing context or process for interactions with North Korea. Often there is not. So on that basis, the president has to decide how high a priority will this be, what will be the goals that any president will be trying to achieve, and how much will it also depend on relations with others.
Usually, how long in their presidency, how much into their presidency already that presidents of the United States would realize what kinds of approach they would take toward the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue? Well,
on that, presidents are often very reactive to actual events or discoveries. If we could take just recent presidents as an example of this, when President George W. Bush came into office, the Korean nuclear issue was already very much on the radar screen because of the agreed framework that had been achieved with the Clinton administration. But the agreed framework was already in big trouble at that point. But it took precipitating events in the context of President Bush, intelligence findings that suggested that North Korea had a separate covert uranium enrichment program apart from what the agreed framework was slowing down. In the case of President Obama and in the case of President Trump, both of them were reacting to very visible events, real-world events. I remember very clearly the second time I visited North Korea was about 2 weeks after President Obama was inaugurated. North Korea had a a rocket on the launch pad to launch a satellite,
right.
And very soon thereafter, after North Korea proceeded with that launch, it then proceeded with another nuclear weapons test. So he had to grapple with it very immediately, and Trump very, very much the same, based on both real-world events, that is to say, sustained and accelerated weapons testing and missile testing, and also projections by the intelligence community that an ICBM capability could be achievable by North Korea in the not-too-distant future.
Mr. Palach, you were called in by the Obama administration 2013. That was the time to brief President Obama in his Oval Office about what exactly is going on with the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula. Do you still remember exactly how things were being discussed? And what is the format when the president is listening to different opinions coming from scholars and also coming from officials from different parts of the branch of the government?
Well, one small correction, it was not in the Oval Office. It was in the Roosevelt Room, where many of these meetings are held. The Roosevelt Room has much more of a seminar-like quality. You're sitting around a big table on opposite sides of a table. You can accommodate at the table maybe about 6 or 7 people on either side of the table.
What kind of the others, you know, besides you, who is a scholar, who are the other people that usually, the type of people being selected to brief the president?
It depends very much on the president in question. It happened that President Obama was very, very interested in occasional interactions like this, where he would call in some prominent experts. The other 4 people were there are all very, very well known. I don't want to go into names, but they were very renowned scholars in their own way from different aspects of these questions. President Obama was very, very comfortable with that kind of a format. I'm unaware that President Trump has had any outsiders in to brief him on these issues. He tends to rely, to the extent that he's relying on anyone, and again, he's been concentrating a lot on trying to understand these issues better. He relies primarily on those from the intelligence community, as I understand it. Perhaps now, because Mr. Pompeo has moved from the CIA to the State Department, he may be calling on some State Department people to greet him. What
are the factors that's eventually going to decide the policies and the approach of an American president toward the DPRK issue and also toward the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue? Is it, given your previous knowledges interacting with the American president, domestic politics? Is it strategic goals of the United States in the region and beyond? Is it the current affairs of the day that is the president has to deal with? Is it the balance of different issues? Is it about, you know, the economic and trade, the priorities that the president has to struggle with? What exactly is it if you look back at some of your discussions and the results?
I think it depends very much president to president. And again, the contrast between Obama and Trump is very, very great. Obama was making a set of underlying strategic calculations. If Trump was, or is, I should say, President Trump is very, very tactical in his approach, very immediate, very reactive. The question of whether he is prepared to absorb information from experts, whether within the government, from the outside, very different from President Obama. And so, as we know, the amount of tumult and turmoil almost in American decision-making leading up to the summit meeting in Singapore has been extraordinary. And I don't see anything that would have been remotely similar under President Obama, even as the press of events dictates certain kinds of actions.
But Mr. Palach, you also see that President Trump has been changing his way of portraying the importance and significance of the summit.
He has said all along, I'm not going to go down the path that other presidents have followed, which was really directed mainly at President Clinton and President Bush, not at President Obama, because President Obama never really sustained an open-ended negotiating process with North Korea. But now we see Trump maybe being a little bit more realistic. looking at his real options as opposed to ones that are just more magical thinking, essentially is talking about a process that, even if we don't know exactly yet what will evolve in the aftermath of the Singapore summit, it looks a lot like a protracted negotiating process that President Clinton undertook in various ways, and certainly President Bush. It does suggest to me that Trump or some around him really took a harder look, not at the bumper stickers, the grandiose claims about we're going to do this and we're going to do that, but rather somewhere a more strategic judgment has seemed to evolve. The question for President Trump, because he's very, very tactical, he's not a strategic operator, the question is whether this will persist after the summit.
Thank you so much, Johnson Pollock, a scholar who has been working on the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue for decades. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your experiences and stories with us. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone here on the World Insight team in Beijing, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.